Welcome to the Spotlight. I'm David Dunmoyer, your host and Associate Vice President at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Oftentimes in policy, we're talking about issues that have metastasized for years, problems that we're trying to solve that were created or left unchecked. And it's rare and important when we get to talk about issues that are proactive, forward-looking. And it's even further rarer to have a technology that's a once in decades internet level, semiconductor level transformation. Now, today we get to talk about one of those technologies, and that's quantum technology. And the goal of today's discussion is really just to have an open, honest discussion about how Texas can lead, and more importantly, why Texas needs to lead on it, but also hopefully to convince all of you that quantum is an accessible term. It shouldn't elicit fear of physics lectures or anything that sets you off from the discussion, because it relates to each and every one of us. I'm confident that we can do that with our audience here today, because I'm confident that we have no better guests to join us here today. Niccolo de Masi, the CEO of IonQ. Just brief bio, and then I can't wait to jump into this discussion. You serve as chairman and CEO of IonQ, which is America's leading pure play quantum computing company and networking company, and the first to go public. You are a Cambridge-trained physicist who spent 2 decades building consumer technology companies before taking the helm of IonQ in early 2025. I'll also add that you are prolific. We were talking about how you're constantly on the go, different states, DC, testifying before Congress, testifying here in Texas to make sure we have a Texas Quantum Initiative, all that and so much more. But I want to pull a quote that we'll pull a thread on today from you, sir. And you believe that quantum is coming sooner than most people think. So today, we're going to talk about just how soon, what that's going to look like. So, Niccolo, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Honor and pleasure to be here, sir.
Well, actually, before we dive into the questions, I'm just curious to know, obviously, I have some of your background here, and you're supremely qualified to be talking about quantum. What got you into this field, and what kind of drives you on a daily basis to make sure we're the leading country on quantum?
Believe it or not, I read our founders' paper in 1995 when I was an undergraduate student at Cambridge University. And it was sort of like a shot heard around the world. If you were into quantum mechanics, if you'd heard about Richard Feynman's postulates from the 1970s, which seemed like a really long time ago, even in the mid-90s, 20-year-old idea, use the fundamental properties of nature and quantum mechanics to build quantum computers and quantum security. Mm-hmm. He came up with both these ideas on a whiteboard, like 1973. And our founder built the world's first quantum logic gate in 1995. And if you were a physicist, frankly, in any research lab or university, you sat up and took notice of that because it was a massive empirical milestone. Mm-hmm. Now you scroll forward to IonQ in 2026, just a short 30 years later. Mm-hmm. We have the other bookend of the industry also, which is not only were we the first public company in the sector, and I took IonQ public in 2020, but we also have built the world's first full fault-tolerant, shovel-ready blueprint. We call it our walking cat architecture. Mm-hmm. We published that just in April 26. Okay, so between those bookends of this industry, technically, we've been pursuing not just rapid commercialization of computing, but we've also built the world's largest, leading, and I'd argue only full quantum platform company. So we do quantum computing, sensing, networking, security, mm-hmm. and here out of Texas, we're also the leading what we call merchant supplier to the sector. So we sell our quantum atomic clocks, we sell our photonic interconnects. We're closing an acquisition of a business called Skywater with a really large presence here in the Austin area. We'll be selling quantum foundry services and semiconductor, chip services, if you will, the quantum computing industry as well. Mm-hmm. Overall, quantum is coming like a freight train, and it's coming sooner than people think in all aspects of computing, sensing, security, and networking. What is different about quantum from GPUs and what's been rebranded from machine learning to AI mm-hmm. Is I always jokingly say, we're not focused on helping anybody cheat on their homework. So there isn't a search bar where you go in and sort of ask questions to sort of, cut out learning if you're in school. Right. We're focused on advancing fundamentally every aspect of applied science.
Okay.
Okay, so from chemistry to molecular research, through to materials, through to defense intelligence, logistics, creating new batteries, creating new battlefield technologies, and Battlefield of the Future runs through us, for sure. But fundamentally, quantum is going to be both complementary to AI, but it will also ultimately supersede as the machines become more powerful.
So to take all that, kind of distill down, and then we can jump into the specific vectors or verticals of IonQ. I think for our listeners, there's a better comprehension now of the computers we have in, I'm pointing to my phone right here, phones, laptops, and we think about some of the possibilities that AI has helped unlock. There's a totally different way of thinking about how you compare the smartphone to the quantum realm. As simply as you can do it, what is that difference that you see from the computers we know today versus what you guys are building out?
Yeah, so John von Neumann wrote this great paper in 1947 that kind of kicked off the last 80 years of classical computing. And he wrote out an architecture that's analogous to our walking cat architecture we wrote out in April this year that really foreshadowed everything that's happened with CPUs and then GPUs. Now, CPUs, of course, were the Pentium era, if you remember, for Intel in the 80s and 90s. And we went pretty far on that. And then these graphics processing units came along that for a while people thought were just going to be used in the PlayStation Portable or the Sony PlayStation, etc., for video games. Turned out, if you had a lot of these GPUs together, these graphics processing units, you could do smarter things and harder things than CPUs could do. I honestly, for the sake of the layperson, QPUs, quantum processing units, should be thought of the same way. Okay. It's the next leg up in the computing revolution that's over 80 years in. It's, I would argue, the end point of the computing revolution in the sense that fundamentally harnessing, atoms themselves to perform computations using, in our case, microwave control and laser control systems, is about as far as you can push quantum mechanics to do useful things. And, instead of the ones and zeros you get from semiconductor gates opening and closing, we have what we call qubits, and they are a fundamental element of nature. In our case, ions. That's why IonQ is named IonQ, is we use ions, to believe it or not, to perform calculations kind of in parallel. Quantum mechanics, Richard Feynman used to joke, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you haven't spent enough time with it. Right. So I'm not going to spend, our hour together trying to delve into the depths of that. But needless to say, the properties that are fundamental to nature, and quantum mechanics is the world's most successful physical theory. Everything from, computation, computers through to your car or your plane, the space race, it all relies on quantum mechanics. Whether you know it or not, that's actually what is producing the most accurate forecasts and predictions. And so using an ion in what's called an entangled state, lots of ions together, enables you with clever algorithms to solve problems that might take a CPU or a GPU a century or maybe even a million years in some cases.
Yeah. Can you give me a specific example on that? Because oftentimes we don't know what our traditional computers are incapable of doing. It could be a time issue, but where's something right now that you see, okay, this is where the more traditional advanced computing stops and where quantum begins, just to connect with our audience?
Yeah, so there's some famous problems that have been postulated for a long time. And we'll come back to probably the security threat that exists, not just for Texas, but our nation. But quantum computers have quite famous algorithms around logistics. How do you route packages, for example, traveling salesperson problems. It also has famous examples around cracking cryptography, and that's why the president in the White House, of course, has issued executive orders around protecting the nation's infrastructure for a day when our adversaries have quantum computers powerful enough to crack encryption. But sticking to the positive impacts in applied science only, the easiest example, I think, for people to wrap their head around is simulating atoms, molecules, materials, and nature itself. So GPUs are effectively large-scale correlation engines. You do have one in your phone, but the clever stuff that people talk about when they say AI, they require massive data centers with racks and racks of these things, right? Yeah. And what GPUs do is you dump in a bunch of data, and they look for correlations, and they produce correlations that looks to some people intelligent, right? That's how it finishes a sentence. That's how it can produce insights because you didn't realize that these things were correlated with these things. It's also why they're so data hungry. You got to dump in the whole internet, if you will, right? Quantum computers don't need or use large amounts of data. They're kind of like what I call it old school computing. Humans are in charge. We're solving problems the old-fashioned way. You tell the machine to run an algorithm. Those algorithms, however, can back solve perfectly. For example, for material properties that you want, or for molecular properties you want for drug design, or simulating an engineering problem perfectly, as opposed to estimating it. Because what GPUs do is they generally estimate.
Sure.
Those estimates might be really good, but as molecules get longer, as materials get more complex, they really struggle beyond a certain point to provide good answers as opposed to hallucinations. And that's where quantum computers take over.
So hitting pause there for a moment, you'll know this better than I do. I think it's called the Chinese thought experiment, Chinese black box, where when they're explaining machine learning and kind of the GPU point you're getting to on correlations, the way that we can envision AI, let's take that, is there's a man who's in a room and somebody is sliding Chinese text to him and he doesn't know Mandarin. But this gentleman has access to the entire alphabet of Chinese letters, and so he's able to piece together bit by bit, okay, this is the request, there's a question I must answer, I will piece together bit by bit without any general understanding of what's actually being said other than rote regurgitation. Is that fair to kind of analogize that's how the GPU space works, and quantum goes beyond that mere repetition and regurgitation?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's one apt analog. Quantum computers don't hallucinate. If they create a correct, a perfect answer, or if they can't solve the problem. Look, I want to be realistic that we live in a classical input and output world. Your phone and your laptop is a classical device. And so for the next few years, you're going to be inputting problems on a classical device that calls a quantum computer that then returns an answer on a classical device. We're a ways off from you having a quantum computer in your pocket. Right now, our quantum computers, IonQ, they're the size of the mainframe computers that you would have seen, in enterprises and governments, in the earlier era for CPUs and GPUs. And right now we're focused on power and achieving the outputs because of, frankly, the national security implications and economic growth implications and the phenomenal breakthroughs that come for enterprise government in every aspect of applied science. I mean, let's take some easy examples. We're focused on better battery technologies, right? We're focused on better positioning, navigation, and time, better GPS. That's not computing, but it uses our atomic clocks, uses our space capabilities, uses our optical interconnects, and also uses our integrated photonics so that we can effectively keep track of time more accurately, which means we can keep track of distance more accurately from space. And so, I always remind everyone that everyone interacts with a quantum element every day, which is we all use GPS, right? And so making GPS more accurate from a meter to 3 millimeters changes the battlefield. It changes autonomous driving. There's probably $1 trillion of value a year, maybe more, maybe it's trillions of dollars of value that comes from having accurate GPS today. There's trillions more to be had as you make the GPS less prone to jamming on the battlefield, and also, of course, much more accurate, right? Personalized medicine. Everyone finds that interesting. If we can back solve for molecules that you need specifically to solve your specific issues in the fullness of time, that's incredibly valuable to humanity, not just to pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies. So, we solve problems in the quantum computing space not that you need solved in a microsecond. So I always say that we're not in the banner ad business, right?
Yep.
You know, GPUs are fantastic correlation engines, the greatest we've ever built. If you click on a map of Italy, you're going to get sold a flight, a hotel, a bus. Like, they're really good at that.
Yeah.
We're not in that business. We solve problems that take a century and turn that into 6 days.
Yeah.
Or a problem, turn a problem that takes a millennium and turn that into something you can do once a month or once a day kind of thing.
I'm thinking, and we'll get to the data center AI, kind of how the interplay between the quantum industry. But Texas right now, one of the big issues is grid resilience, grid management, and certainly catalyzed by data centers, but there's longstanding issues. This is one of those not necessarily century-long questions, but it's been quite a long time for Texas to figure out how can we get our grid in order. Are there applications here when it comes to resource management in states? What does that look like? If there
For
are?
sure. I mean, we already do work actually in Tennessee with Electric Power Board of Tennessee on grid optimization problems. Every state, every nation state also worries about this.
Yeah.
So phenomenal complexity in general is a category that's great for quantum computing.
Sure.
There are exponential speed up opportunities with quantum computing. There's also what we call quadratic speed up. So exponential speed up, turns 1,000 years into, hours or days. Quadratic speed up turns 24 hours of computing into 17 minutes. It's still very valuable. And there's applications in financial services. There's also applications in prediction. And there's applications, of course, in optimization. And what we find time and time again is that as we recast problems to run on our quantum computers, they produce insights that aren't obvious to humans or traditional classical machines. So we've been better at what we call early signal detection, otherwise known as prediction,
Sure.
for longer, earlier than would have been predicted. And this is really exciting. Why is that? Because we live in a quantum mechanical world. There are stochastic, random, changes in our world that are not obvious to classical machines, but quantum computers tend to pick up these sorts of changes. And so we get better results, we believe, in a lot of cases, predicting the future, if you will, with less data, right? So quantum computers, I think of them as kind of, you want big problem, smaller data. GPUs want small problem, huge data.
So let's try this. Paint a picture for any lawmakers listening. Water scarcity. One of the big issues in Texas, we do a lot of research on water policy. And the data is not that accurate, right? We're doing predictions, especially groundwater modeling, where it's really hard to have accurate measurements. That determines how state policymakers are crafting legislation. It determines the local level, how we're administering resources. How could you visualize what Texas water management would look like with quantum insights? You have a better picture of the actual lay of the land.
Yeah, that's a really big question, and there's lots of components to it. So there is not only the optimization of how you're distributing it, but there's prediction of how it's being consumed. Then there's going to be water treatment plants and whether or not you can help with the chemistry there. So there's chemistry materials problems there. There's some atmospheric prediction questions there as well. There's some underground, aquifer predictions, to be had. And then of course there's, water generation technologies, whether that is getting more water out of the atmosphere or whether that is, desalination and drilling and so on. And so you have to really break down questions. If you think about, our ability to impact almost any big question, I like to argue is greater than almost any other company in the world, which is why we get motivated to work as hard as everyone does at IonQ. We come to work knowing that we can deliver our passion project and make an impact here, whether your passion is chemistry, pharma, molecular engineering, the battlefield of the future, defense, logistics, et cetera, financial services, you can work on that here. And no one solved the problems that we're working on before. We're not a panacea.
Sure.
We can't just, there's no magic button. You can't just say, do what I'm thinking, kind of thing, right? Solve the problems of the world. You have to deconstruct the challenge, right, and turn it into applied science problems that we can recast to run on our computers. We also don't make data up. but we can get better predictions and do better on things like fraud prevention and fraud prediction than classical computers do. And fraud's a big topic, by the way, in general. I mean, in almost every government agency, utility like that, there's a lot of waste that comes through there. And there will be waste and loss in the water system as well, for example, right?
So you get a better, clearer picture of the entire scope of the issue at play, the consequences, secondary effects, tertiary effects. Now you've hinted at encryption, Q-Day. I want to shift there for a second because I think for a lot of listeners that have heard probably more than the average person about quantum, they've heard Q-Day. They know it's scary. They know it's a national security concern. They may not fully understand what that is, why that's important. So what is Q-Day and how does quantum change cybersecurity for our nation? Well, for the world.
Yeah, so quantum sensing, security, infrastructure, computing, we were in kind of all 4 or 5 areas in our platform. Quantum sensing, believe it or not, has applications, the energy business, the water business, things like tracking, gravimeters track, ultimately, gravitational, depth, let's just say. And so we're on submarines to satellites with our quantum platform, with a piece of our quantum platform, often with more of it there. Now, in the cryptography space specifically, this is one of the classic problems that's been pointed out for decades. Quantum computers will deliver what's called exponential speed up to factoring prime numbers, which is the basis for practically all modern banking, digital commerce, kind of civilization as we know it, for better or worse. All of the hacking that happens today that you read about in the news, it's not actually hacking the fundamental basis of cryptography. It's kind of playing around with the edges of the network and finding other vulnerabilities, right? What was the input, what was the output, et cetera. But actually being able to, by brute force, find what the 2 large prime numbers are that were multiplied together without knowing either of them is something that a classical computer finds really hard to do. That's the century to millennium problem for even all the world's greatest supercomputers working together. You're in the not useful time horizon.
So in translating that in its most rudimentary form, that would be essentially randomly trying every single password that an organization might have, and there's so many different permutations, it would take a century to try them all, essentially.
That's correct, by brute force, But quantum computers, and this gentleman, Peter Shor, wrote out this algorithm, decades ago, in the 90s. We knew about it when I read this paper about IonQ's first quantum logic gate in 95. Has a method for looking at this problem, let's just say for the layperson, kind of in parallel using entangled qubits. If you have, a couple thousand entangled logical qubits, you can look at a problem that size in hours, probably. Hours probably starts with days the first time we do it, eventually becomes hours, someday becomes minutes, which is a lot faster than a century. It all of a sudden means that there's a challenge here for national security. There's a challenge for banking and commerce. It's kind of a, I'm not trying to be alarmist, but it's a civilization we know it multi-trillion-dollar impact problem if our adversaries get there first. And so what IonQ is doing on this topic is 2 things. One, we are leading the race, right, to drive success in running Shor's algorithm. And I said last summer 25, that we expect we'll be able to get there in the lab by the end of this administration. And I think people thought that was an aggressive statement last summer, but a year on, everyone agrees now, right? It doesn't matter if you're, large companies, large governments, the White House wouldn't have issued an executive order on June 22nd this year, 26, around the need for post-quantum cryptography and quantum security if they didn't think that was an issue much sooner than it was previously thought. The bad guys out there, they're already, what they call harvesting your data now, saving it to decrypt it later. So whether it's credit card data, banking data, national security data, people will be able to crack this at some point. Obviously the land of the blockchain has the same risks. Actually slightly easier. We can probably crack elliptical encryption a year before RSA 2048, which is what secures most communications and banking and so on, right?
Are there any dystopian sci-fi movies to you that capture what would happen if China is the perpetrator of Q Day? They are the most sophisticated. Like, just take a second to paint a picture. What would happen in America if tomorrow China has a full quantum capability and can decrypt our entire critical infrastructure assets?
Well, I mean, look, classical cybersecurity issues are ramping up exponentially also. So, that mythos scare and, how our nation's taken actions on certain AI algorithms are kind of examples and foreshadowing of what that looks like, right? And unfortunately, the two are going to merge.
Yeah.
Right? Bad guys are going to take the best of AI and the best of quantum computers. And this makes, the security threats really, really concerning because it can also iterate, learn, and solve for network, let's just call it weaknesses in the fundamental, nature of the encryption as well as around the edges of the network, right? So, nations are going to be on the offense and defense here all the way through. But, having your data splattered across the internet will become more commonplace if we don't take action.
Right.
Fortunately, IonQ has a large focus on what we're doing to secure nation-state infrastructure, and large, corporate enterprise infrastructure, because this race between code makers and code breakers has been going, back to Julius Caesar and earlier.
Sure.
And people have been doing this a long time. So the race, I am confident the race will go on. I do not sit across from you going, there's an existential sci-fi problem here. I think we're calling out the problem. We're a public company. We're a U.S. company. I care a lot about our nation, and we do a lot of work with the Department of War. We do a lot of work with our administration in Washington, and so we're advising, we're also implementing, we're also doing a lot of R&D to make sure that our solutions can deliver on time and deliver at scale. Right? Yeah. People do need to act, though. This doesn't get solved by telepathy or magic. People need to act. They have some time, but we're now inside the planning horizon for most, chief information security officers. Most CISOs now need to act, right? And that's what's changed in the last year. As a year ago, I was, the first voice saying, this is happening, in the next 2 or 3 years, not the next 5 or 7 years or even 10 years.
Yeah.
And so, when 10 years turns into 10 quarters, all of a sudden the world looks different.
Right.
We face our own, cyber threats at IonQ. We're hardening infrastructure ourselves, physically and digitally, because, our geopolitical adversaries are trying to steal what we're up to, and our government cares about that, and we care about that, of course. But yeah, I mean, look, obviously, whole economies can be taken hostage if you don't secure yourself, and currency can be stolen, and assets can be stolen, and it would wreak permanent havoc, right? Civilization as we know it would wind back, you tell me, 50 years, kind of thing, right?
Right.
But we're smart as a humanity's smart, and humanity, is creative as well, and where there's a will, there's a way. So we are confident that IonQ is providing the solution, both quantum key distribution, which is physical infrastructure you need, as effectively, defense in depth for the most critical parts of the data center infrastructure. And we provide post-quantum cryptography software so that everything from your phone to your network connection with your phone, your computer, to the data center can also be secured.
Right. Well, so you touched on the White House and how active they've been in recognizing the opportunities, the threats. States across the country, many of which you're working directly with, are really seizing on the opportunities. We'll get to Texas. This is a place you call home. This is, obviously the foundation. We're focused on ways Texas can lead. But let's first start with other states. Illinois comes to mind, but there's a host of other states that are taking more proactive steps on quantum. So just bird's eye view, what are you seeing happening in other states that looks positive, where they're positioning themselves as leaders in the space?
Yeah, and look, the question can be extended globally when you say states, right? Yeah. So nation states are recognizing, not just because of the executive orders, but even prior to that, that the jobs of the future run through quantum sensing, quantum networking, quantum security, and of course, quantum algorithms, quantum computing. The great thing from my perspective and why we love what we do at IonQ is we don't disrupt any jobs, right? Everything we do here is adding jobs and creating jobs, because presently, if a problem takes between a century and a millennium to solve, no one's applying resources against that. They just say it's not solvable, move on and do something else, right? So kind of by definition, everything we do here is job creating. I think there is a lot of recognition by both states in our nation and nation states worldwide that the GPU, machine learning, AI era crept up very, very slowly for decades and then real fast, right? And people feel like they missed preparing for that, right? They don't want to make the same mistake a second time. And I also think that most states and nation states recognize there's an opportunity here to position themselves, not just so they have the workforce of the future, but so they have the research universities of the future, and they attract, the companies of the future. And so, we see strong engagement from, forward-thinking administrations, governments, leaders, and sovereign, let's just call it sovereigns, whether it's a state sovereign or a nation state sovereign, sovereigns that recognize the need for resilience are right there with us. I mean, at the end of the day, IonQ, I say that like pretty much I'm in the business of selling sovereign systems and sovereign resiliency in some way. We sell computer systems, we sell quantum sensors, we sell, quantum secure networks. We sell positioning, navigation, and time, GPS, if you will. And the world has evolved in the last decade. I think the era of we'll just have a cable and rely on somebody else to invest in stuff looks different today than it did, a decade ago. And I don't think that's changing. I think sovereignty as a mindset and resilience as a mindset are here to stay. I think they're here to stay for large enterprise leaders. I think they're ultimately here to stay for households. And they're here to stay if you run a state or a nation state, right? And, as has been the mood that's been led by, President Trump in the White House, it is silly of us to hand the keys to some portion of our economy or supply chain for a relatively modest sum annually because we feel like we don't want to do it or want to build it. That's silly, right? And I think we've seen the action that we've taken as a nation over things like rare earths, and the same mindset is being applied to resilience through quantum. Ultimately, you've got to have your own machines. Relying on them being provided, by at long distance, I don't think is going to probably be the winning model. I think nations want to control their own data. I think countries and companies do too, and I think people recognize that quantum, is going to come as quickly at some point in the national consciousness, if you will, as you saw with, OpenAI, where my joke is ChatGPT 1 was a research curiosity, ChatGPT 2 was a hobby, and 3 was kind of a, oh goodness gracious, what just happened? Right? And how do we not see that coming? And what's similar, but even faster with quantum computing, is we don't double the compute power like Moore's law every 2 years. Every time we add what's called a logical qubit, one of these ions that can perform a computation, we double the machine space. And so, we're going from 36 to 64 algorithmic qubits between 24 and 25. We're going to 256 qubits this year, 10,000 next year. And when you go from 36 to 64, you're adding 28 qubits. It's actually 2 to the power 28 more powerful. And so going from 100 qubits, our current tempo systems, to 256 next year, we're actually this year but shipping next year, and then 10,000 increases the compute space so much there isn't a number for 2 to the power 156. I mean, 2 to the power 156, these are sort of numbers that you see when you're talking about how many atoms or molecules there are, in our solar system. 2 to the 256 is about as many atoms as there are in the known universe. They're really big numbers. No one knows what you call a number after about 2 to the 20, right? And so what people don't realize is that the world changes, annually with our machine roadmap in a really good way, obviously, for our nation. But we fear that our geopolitical adversaries might be a year behind us, but they're not 10 years behind us, right? And that's why the security conversation is really important, right? Yeah. But it will radically change. I mean, humans are not good at understanding exponentials. I think that's kind of a common refrain. And quantum computing is doubly exponential. And so people really can't comprehend what all of a sudden becomes possible
so
in the space of a year.
The hockey stick chart doesn't even fully capture.
It's like a double hockey stick chart.
Yeah.
It just goes vertical.
Right.
In the next year or two.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that doesn't mean that everyone has one in their back pocket.
Sure.
But the capability is there. And so we already have states, nation states, large companies, government agencies, going, hey, we get it. Like in a year or two, we want to be on your ecosystem because we already have mapped out the problems that you'll be able to solve.
Yeah.
Right.
So one of the ways Texas is starting to lead in this issue was a legislative effort that you guys were very involved in. That was the creation of the Texas Quantum Initiative.
Yes.
So take a moment to talk about what was the vision behind that, and now that the council is forming and there's a convening where the idea is to talk about ways Texas can lead. Let's go magic wand. How can Texas lead? How can we use this initiative as a jumping off point to truly be a national leader?
Yeah. Well, look, I love our state and my state, and I collect Texas independence era maps, believe it or not, and so I'm
sure we have some around here.
I'm sure we do. Actually, I have a few great ones at home, and I'm inspired by the fact that sovereign systems and resilience is something that Texas has the scale to achieve and really should achieve. We have an energy industry, we have a semiconductor industry, we have a defense industry, right? We're business friendly. We have tremendous research universities, and we've got population scale, right? And economy scale, right? And it's the scale of, I think in the last few years, the last decade, Texas has overtaken Italy as an economy. It's amazing.
I know, we're coming from France.
It's amazing, right? So, bottom line, it is a nation state in scale, and I believe that that Texas should think accordingly, which is we should lead by connecting universities, government, industry, and of course infrastructure to make sure that we have a quantum secure network that businesses can be built upon.
Sure.
To make sure that our critical infrastructure is the safest in the nation. To make sure that we're leading also in connecting ground to space communications, and also to make sure we're leading in workforce development, research, education around the jobs of the future that quantum are bringing.
Yeah.
So the Texas Quantum Mission is the first step on that. We now need to take the next few steps. Let's get it funded and start operationalizing it.
Right. And that's, I know we've chatted with your team about this. That was Giovanni Capriglione in the House and Tan Parker in the Senate, who, a lot of technology initiatives led by them. They're very keenly interested and aware of threats, opportunities, everything we're talking about here today. For our listeners, I think there's some good corollaries on artificial intelligence where Texas was able to start leading in some of the policy with their sandboxes and ways to promote innovation. It was a similar trajectory where one session they passed an AI advisory council bill where there's going to be a convening of lawmakers to learn from industry, to hear from academics. Here's where Texas can lead and grow. We're seeing that same thing happen in quantum, which to me is a positive indication, and knowing what members are interested in these issues, those that are interested, they 100% get this. I think where your voice is so critical, though, is as policy nerds or as policymakers, we're looking for some of the big picture on, we want Texas to lead for the sake of being the best state in the nation. There's an understanding on some of the national security concerns, thinking about we have a newly created Texas Cyber Command that's focused on these issues, the Texas Space Commission. And I think, and actually let me correct myself, because the big picture is missing how all of this can be interconnected within quantum. So I love you're sitting down with Governor Greg Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, Speaker Burrows, all here at the table. They want to hear Niccolo's 3 policy recommendations. What can Texas do next session? shoot from the hip. What can we do to lead?
Yeah. So look, step one, let's secure all the critical infrastructure.
Okay.
Right? Because it's an existential risk. Bad guys will get there at some point. Doesn't really matter what year the bad guys get there. It's going to happen. It's happening now, right? And the great thing about quantum key distribution, which is our a physical hardware solution, is that it protects you today also. Mythos attacks don't work for data in flight if you use quantum key distribution, right? So protect the state. Let's start there. Encourage companies in the state to protect themselves. And you want as much network infrastructure as possible across the state to be quantum secure as soon as possible, because it builds ecosystem. It's a platform for everyone to be here, right? So step one, let's make sure that we fund ourselves to be safe, because it's really an existential issue that is being faced at some point. And I would argue that even the classical era of Mythos, it's an existential issue. That's why there's a Texas Cyber Command, right? Yeah. The second thing we got to do, obviously, is start investing in education and machine access, right? So to create the workforce of the future, you want college students and someday soon high school students to understand how to build algorithms for quantum computers. That's going to be a skill set that will look something like, what's the proverbial $100 billion AI engineer that you hear about fought over in California?
Yeah. Right.
I'm convinced that the next equivalent high-value job will be the quantum algorithm. And there's a huge shortage worldwide. And people who understand quantum mechanics, quantum computing, have some domain expertise and can build these hybrid workflows, as we were talking a few minutes ago, we go from classical device to a quantum computer, back to a classical device, right? And, look, Texas is business-friendly. We have every industry from pharma to energy, defense, represented here. I think there's a tremendous opportunity, right, to be the leading quantum state in the nation because of the alignment not only with, of course, the administration, the wonderful administration we have in the White House, but also because you can take a broad-based approach to solving problems early, being quantum secure early, and building the infrastructure in the state and the universities to make sure there's a permanent lead here, right? Doesn't come for free, but the University of Texas systems, I think the best endowed in the nation, for example. We have an incredible workforce, and we have a semiconductor manufacturing industry as well. We've got IonQ in the state as well. You've got great advantages here, right? And so I think the secret sauce here is, first of all, where there's a will, there's a way. The governor needs to declare that this is going to be policy priority, kind of like the president's executive orders. We need to fund the Texas Quantum Initiative. We need to operationalize it. You operationalize it in universities. You operationalize it through securing critical infrastructure. And you operationalize it by, frankly, convening business leaders to ensure that they are moving up the learning curve sooner and using these technologies, right? We're just starting to inflect as an industry in quantum, sensing, networking, computing, security. It's just starting to inflect. But I ask you to cast your mind back. I think Google CEO claims that quantum's 5 years behind AI. 5 years is not a lot of time, right? I mean, if you look at where you are today versus where we were 5 years ago. In 2021, ChatGPT-2, kind of a hobby. Today it's a given, and it's here. We have our own energy industry. We have our own material science industry. There are lasting endowment level advantages, I think, for attracting businesses, growing businesses, building new businesses, workforce development, and also ensuring that Texas is building the quantum future, right? I mean, we want to be manufacturing here, building here, educating here, leading the quantum algorithm research, leading, of course, what we're doing in next generation positioning, navigation, and time. I mean, you've got the space industry, we've got Army Future Command here. I mean, there's a lot of exciting things to tie together. So part of it is, is a mindset also that we're going to own this. We're going to win this, here, if you will. It's going to be our thing.
Yeah. So to bring this back down, and in the interest of time, probably the last question I'll ask, this, because of the non-tangibles, cybersecurity being an example, it's hard to firmly grasp and comprehend why we need to be investing in this. And that's part of why we're talking today, is because we have to raise awareness. There has to be education and understanding of it isn't a critical issue until it happens. And when it happens, it's too late. So to avoid that and thinking positively, it's 5 years from now, to go the CEO of Google, Texas has made the appropriate policy changes. We made the investments. We have more of a talent pipeline. Some of what you outlined is coming to fruition. And you're starting to see the tangible effects of a quantum-centric economy here in Texas. Yeah. How does the everyday Texan notice that change? How would they interact with it, whether that's economically? I guess what I'm asking is, how would they talk about it at the kitchen table at dinner?
Yeah. So safest network in the nation means you're not worried about cyber attacks. Mm-hmm. You're not in the news for having your data splattered across the internet. Safest network means you're also attracting all of the nation's biggest companies to be headquartered here, right? Then you stand back and think about every vertical in the economy of size. So, more efficient energy production, more efficient energy distribution. It's important to ERCOT and, everything we're doing here. Yeah. Think about healthcare. We do a lot of work in the cancer research sector. We do a lot of work in the personalized medicine sector. We do a lot of work in computational engineering. That matters to the whole hardware material science sector. There's almost no company in Texas, I think, that doesn't benefit from new materials. And the great thing about Texas is we're business friendly. So you're going to create new startups built on this platform, right, that drives economic growth, grows, of course, the economy in Texas, and at the same time is growing resilience in Texas. So we're not dependent on things coming across the borders, ultimately, right? If you think about, logistics, the next batch of, PhDs that come out, and that connection between entrepreneurs and research, right? The next leg up in growth, the next leg up in computing growth and power is going to be quantum processing units and quantum technologies. And it's everything from, discovery of oil, discovery of water. You can use our quantum sensors to do that. You can use our space-based quantum sensors also to help in exploration, right? So it helps the Permian Basin, right? We can be more efficient in how we get energy and resources out of the ground, refined, and into people's, frankly, backyards, if you will. We can be more efficient even about, fertilizers, right? So food production can be more efficient, not just distribution of it, but actually the growing, right? And so, and the defense industry, I think, is fairly obvious. There's a defense tech industry that's already very vibrant right here in Austin, and the next leg up is going to be Battlefield of the Future runs right through the quantum technology stack, right? Yeah. So I think, there's 5 years is a long time with technological maturity. I think you're going to have breakthroughs galore if the state positions itself to own the quantum future in every single aspect of applied science. Yeah. Right. Things that were, dreamt of, Jetson-like, breakthroughs will be happening, 5 years from today in every, aspect of applied science if we embrace this.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say is we will finally have hoverboards, right? The age-old
new
conundrum
materials,
of why,
hoverboards, exactly, anti-gravity machines, right. all that stuff, exactly.
Well, Niccolo, thank you so much for your time, for your insights. I'd be remiss if this is the last question. For listeners that want to learn more, want to read up on IonQ, what you all are doing, where can they find you? Where can they find more materials that might interest them?
Well, of course, it's just ionq.com. I mean, we're a public company, so we have analyst days and we have earnings calls, and we're very transparent. And we're obviously looking to continue the growth mindset that Texas has for IonQ itself. I mean, we had maybe 300 employees 2 years ago, and once our latest acquisition closes, it'll be 3,000. Wow. So it's been a lot of growth in 2 years. And I think the sector will keep growing. It does require the right public-private, policy partnerships. It requires the right, mindsets as well as convening powers. But Texas already has a lot of incredible things going for itself. Yeah. Scale, ecosystem, pro-business. And I think that, Texas is positioned to be the quantum leader should we decide to grab that together and go for it. And we really should, because, it's going to be the next big thing after CPUs and GPUs. Right. And if you're a year early, it doesn't matter. But if you're a year late, it does.
Well said. I'd be remiss not to add on our end, and it's lockstep with pretty much everything we talked about today. For folks interested too, texaspolicy.com, we have the Quantum Frontier, our research paper foray into this space, and we go in the weeds on some of what we talked about today and also big picture on policy. We share in the same vision. Texas must lead on this. So we're grateful you're here in Texas and IonQ's at the tip of the spear. So Niccolo, thank you for your time.
Honored to be here. Thank you so much.